Welcome to The Debate. Today we are really dissecting the architecture of a moment. The WNBA has officially released its schedule for the landmark 30th anniversary season. And while there are hundreds of games on the slate, the league has, it's effectively pushed all of its chips into the center of the table for one single date. Saturday, May 9th, 2026. The venue is Gainbridge Fieldhouse. The teams are the Indiana Fever and the Dallas Wings. But, let's be honest about what's actually happening here. This isn't just a season opener, it's a strategic maneuver designed to capture the global zeitgeist. The headline, written in, invisible neon, is Caitlin Clark versus Paige Bueckers.
It is the headline, absolutely. But whether it's a strategic maneuver or, a strategic mistake, I think that's where we're going to find ourselves at odds today. We're looking at a scheduling decision that prioritizes a very specific prepackaged narrative above the actual messy reality of the sport as it exists in 2026.
And that's the core question we're debating. Is this decision to launch a historic 30th season by leaning entirely into the Clark versus Bueckers rivalry the correct move to elevate the sport? I'm arguing that this is the definitive statement game the league absolutely needs. It's a necessary capitalization on history to propel the future.
And I'm going to argue that by framing the opener of a grueling, complex professional season primarily around a collegiate rivalry, we are reducing the professional game. We're placing an undue weight of expectation on a single matchup that risks overshadowing the broader complexity of the league, specifically the convergence of 4 number 1 overall picks and all the nuanced variables of a new season. We're sort of training the audience to look for the wrong things, valuing the soap opera over the sport.
I want to challenge that immediately. You say we're training the audience to look for the wrong things, but I'd argue the league is finally respecting what the audience is already looking at. Let's examine the concept of intentionality here. The source material describes this opener as clean and intentional. Now, those aren't throwaway adjectives, they signal a departure from randomness. When the Dallas Wings selected Paige Bueckers with the number 1 overall pick in 2025, a countdown clock effectively started in the minds of millions of fans. The league understands that sports are driven by narrative arcs, and this specific arc, Clark versus Bueckers, is one that has defined an entire generation of women's basketball fans.
And we have to look at the context of last season. The record shows that while this history followed them into the WNBA, injuries really limited their opportunities to actually go head-to-head. There's a tangible sense of disappointment in the source material about those missed connections. So by scheduling this matchup for Game 1 of the 30th season, the league is honoring that history. It's a structural hook. They're saying, we know what you missed, we know what you've been waiting for, and we're giving it to you immediately. It validates the emotional investment of the fan base.
Okay, I understand the marketing logic. It's efficient, it's clean, as you noted. But clean stories are rarely true stories in professional sports. My issue is with the implications of that word intentional. I might use the word reductive. The release explicitly mentions that this game arrives with a weight of expectation that has been building for years. My concern is that by placing this specific weight on the very first game of an anniversary season, you're setting up a scenario where the narrative just completely eclipses the basketball product. We are entering the 3rd decade of this league. That's a mature sports property. Yet the framing here is entirely retrospective. It's looking backward to NCAA tournament battles rather than forward to professional team dynamics. The Dallas Wings didn't just draft Paige Bueckers to be a protagonist in a Caitlin Clark story. They drafted her to integrate into a system, to facilitate offense, to play defense. By pinning the launch of the season on a binary rivalry, we risk ignoring that it's a 5-on-5 sport. The text notes the opener features a season full of unknowns. That is what actually interests me. The chaos, the chemistry, the organic development. When you script the statement before the ball is even tipped, you create fragility. What if this game is a blowout? Or if one of them shoots, 3 for 15? The whole statement falls flat because it wasn't built on the reality of the WNBA in 2026, but on the ghost of 2024.
I think you're creating a false dichotomy between narrative and reality. In the modern sports landscape, the narrative is a driver of the reality. You can't separate the trajectory of the WNBA's recent growth, both economically and culturally, from these two specific figures. The text states clearly that their NCAA battles became reference points for the sport. To ignore that reference point in favor of some, purely technocratic view of team systems would be malpractice for a league celebrating its 30th year. This isn't about ignoring the other players. It's about using your strongest asset to illuminate them. The weight of expectation isn't a burden, it's a spotlight. When you put Clark and Bueckers on the floor at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, you ensure that the entire global basketball community is watching.
Right.
And that gaze then falls on everyone else by proxy. It's the perfect synthesis of past investment and future potential. You capture the casual fan with the rivalry, and you keep them with the product. If you schedule Indiana versus the Washington Mythics on opening night, you lose 40% of those initial eyeballs. That's just the math of stardom.
That is the optimistic view that the rising tide lifts all boats. But let's talk about the product that the spotlight is actually hitting. The source material highlights something that I think is far more significant than the rivalry, yet it gets buried under the headline: the sheer density of talent. We are looking at a game expected to feature 4 consecutive #1 overall draft picks. You have Aaliyah Boston from 23, Caitlin Clark from 24, Paige Bueckers from 25, and whoever Dallas selects with the top pick in 2026. I mean, think about the tactical implication of that. This is my issue with the rivalry framing. When you bill it as Clark versus Bueckers, you are implicitly pushing Aaliyah Boston, a former Rookie of the Year and all-star, a dominant interior force, into the background. You're pushing the 2026 #1 pick, whoever that phenom is, into the background. These aren't supporting cast members. These are pillars of the league. The complexity of having 4 top picks on the court at the same time is a fascinating tactical puzzle. How does Dallas integrate Bueckers with their new 2026 pick? How does Boston operate in the paint with the spacing Clark provides? That's the substantive debate. But the statement game marketing just flattens that rich, complex puzzle into a one-on-one duel.
See, I see the distinction you're drawing, but I would frame it differently. I don't believe highlighting the rivalry diminishes the other #1 picks. I think it contextualizes them. The casual fan or even the engaged fan needs an entry point. The Clark versus Bueckers fed line is the door. The 4 #1 picks is the room they walk into. You mentioned Aaliyah Boston. Let's really look at that. Aaliyah Boston benefits immensely from the gravity Caitlin Clark pulls. When the defense is extended to 30 feet because of the Clark effect, Boston has room to operate. So by highlighting the perimeter rivalry, you're actually setting the stage for Boston to dominate inside. The narrative serves the tactics. And regarding the integration of talent, that's exactly why this game needs to be first. The league is capitalizing on the countdown that began when Dallas drafted Bueckers. You can't manufacture that kind of anticipation. It's organic.
To say, let's focus on the tactical puzzle, is intellectually satisfying for you and me, but it doesn't capture the emotional resonance that drives viewership. The statement is that the WNBA is home to the biggest stars in the world, and they're playing each other immediately.
I'm sorry, I just don't buy that the anticipation is entirely organic at this stage. It was organic in college. Now it's being curated. The text mentions that this is the first time since 2016, the Wings' inaugural season, that Indiana and Dallas meet on opening night. That is a manufactured scheduling quirk designed to force a narrative.
Of course it is.
It's not a random draw. And let's talk about that schedule structure. You brought up the Atlanta Dream and the Las Vegas Aces. To me, those are the true measuring sticks. The Aces are the reigning champions. The Dream were the Fever's 2025 postseason opponents. I mean, if we want to talk about rivalries, shouldn't we be looking at the team that Indiana actually played in the playoffs? That is a professional rivalry born of a series, of adjustments, of elimination. Clark versus Bueckers is a sentimental rivalry. Clark versus the Dream or Clark versus the Aces is a competitive reality. By front-loading the season with the sentimental choice, we're signaling that the past matters more than the present competitive landscape.
I disagree with the valuation there. A sentimental rivalry, as you call it, carries a cultural cachet that a playoff rematch sometimes lacks, just because of the sheer scale of the audience. The text says this matchup is a reference point. That suggests it anchors the timeline of the sport. You need those reference points to measure progress. And about the weight of expectation, the text explicitly notes this game comes after last year's disappointments with injuries. There's a redemption arc here that you're dismissing. Great players and great leagues, they crave that weight.
By placing this game first, the league is effectively clearing the deck. They're saying, here's the match you missed. Once that's played, then the team can move on to the season full of unknowns. It clears the air. If you put this game in July, that whole will they or won't they narrative hangs over the first half of the season like a cloud.
By playing it in May, you let the basketball breathe for the rest of the year.
That's a fair point about clearing the air, but I worry about the cost of that clarity. The text describes the opener as a statement game. My question is, what happens if the statement is, garbled? You mentioned the disappointments of injuries last year. Injuries are a reality. If one of these two players is dealing with a minor knock or is on a minutes restriction because it's game one, the statement becomes an apology. There's a reason championships aren't won in May. That weight of expectation can be detrimental to a team's organic development. Consider the Dallas Wings. They're integrating the 2026 #1 pick alongside Bueckers. That's a delicate chemistry experiment. You have ball dominance issues to work out, defensive rotations to solve. Putting them in the crucible of a national Super Bowl-style atmosphere on day one might actually hinder their development. It forces them to play up to a narrative. I need to outscore Caitlin, rather than playing to learn their system. I would prefer to see this matchup in June, when the teams have actually found their identities. Then it's Indiana versus Dallas, two fully formed teams, not just Clark versus Bueckers in a shootout.
But that ignores the reality of the 30th anniversary. This isn't just another season, it is a milestone. The league needs to plant a flag in the ground. You can't plant a flag with a wait-and-see approach, you plant it with your biggest assets. The text mentions Indiana's home schedule is built around marquee moments. This implies a structure, a crescendo. You start with the emotional high of the rivalry, you move to the postseason rematch with Atlanta in June, and you peak with the challenge against the champion Aces in August. It's a storytelling arc. If you swap those, you lose the momentum. The weight of expectation is the fuel for that engine. And let's be honest, these players have lived with that weight since they were teenagers. They're not fragile. They're the ones who created this expectation through their excellence. To suggest they need to be protected from the spotlight seems to underestimate the very professionalism you claim to defend.
I don't doubt the players' resilience, I doubt the wisdom of the framing. Let's look closely at that phrase, built around marquee moment. It suggests the schedule is a series of events rather than a coherent campaign. This contributes to the posterization of the league. When we focus so heavily on the marquee, we lose the nuance of the grind. The text notes the unknown variables of the new season. Those variables are where the actual basketball happens. For instance, the defensive schemes Indiana will use against Dallas's new lineup. Or conversely, how will Dallas try to neutralize Boston inside while staying attached to Clark? These are the things that decide games. But when the pregame coverage is 90% focused on two guards who went to college in Iowa and Connecticut, we are actively obscuring the tactical reality. We're training the fan to watch the individual, not the team. And for a league trying to emphasize the quality of its product in year 30, I think that's a missed opportunity.
I think you're underestimating the intelligence of the viewer. They can come for the rivalry and stay for the pick-and-roll defense. But they have to come first. You cannot educate an empty room. Let's look at the venue, Gainbridge Fieldhouse. By hosting the Wings there with the 4 #1 picks, you are creating an environment that simulates playoff intensity on day one. You mentioned that professional rivalries are built on playoff battles. Well, I'd argue that by creating a playoff atmosphere in May, the league is accelerating the creation of that professional rivalry. They are injecting high stakes into the regular season. That's not reductive, that's smart product management. If Game 1 feels like Game 7, that sets a tone for the next 39 games.
Or it artificially inflates the importance of one game in the regular season. My fear is the hangover. After the statement game is over, does the casual fan just tune out until the Aces come to town in August? By putting all the eggs in the Clark Bueckers basket immediately, you risk making the subsequent games against less narratively interesting teams feel flat. And I want to return to the postseason opponent's point. The text says each game carries its own storyline, but all will be measured against expectations set early. That's the danger. We are setting a standard based on a celebrity matchup that might not correlate to the standard of winning basketball. If the Dream beat the Fever in a gritty 75-72 defensive struggle, will the headline be Fever failed to meet expectations because it wasn't the high-scoring shootout people wanted from the opener?
I see why you'd think that. But I'd argue that measured against expectations is exactly what we want. We want the dream games to be measured against the excitement of the opener. We want the bar to be set high. The rivalry is the hook, but the retention mechanism is the quality of play. And this brings us back to the talent. You have Boston, Clark, Bueckers, and the 2026 pick. That is an embarrassment of riches. The narrative aligns with the reality of the talent level. The weight is justified because the skill is there to support it. This isn't a nostalgia act. These are the rising suns of the league. The convergence of narrative and skill is absolute.
The talent is undeniable. I agree. However, talent needs cohesion. The text speaks of a season full of unknowns. I embrace those unknowns. I think the story of the season will be how Aaliyah Boston adapts to year 4. Can she expand her range? Or how the Dallas rookie fits in? Those are the stories that sustain a league for 30 years, not just replaying greatest hits from the NCAA. The statement the WNBA should be making in year 30 is that it's the premier professional basketball league in the world, where systems and coaching win championships, not that it's simply a sequel to the Final Four. By leaning so hard into the latter, we miss the chance to fully assert the former.
But can it not be both? Can we not honor the path that brought these fans here while showcasing the destination? I believe the May 9th opener attempts to do exactly that. It uses the gravity of the Clark-Bueckers dynamic to pull the universe of basketball fans into the orbit of the WNBA's 30th season. Once they're there, the season full of unknowns can unfold. But you need the gravity first. You need the mass to create the orbit.
I suppose my skepticism lies in whether the gravity is being generated by the star or the sport. I want the sport to be the sun, but I acknowledge that in the modern media landscape, the star often has to shine brightest to illuminate the court. My hope is simply that when the ball goes up, the commentary switches from look at the history to look at the execution.
Lines are drawn not just on the court, but in how we interpret the significance of the event. To summarize my position, the scheduling of the Clark-Bueckers matchup to open the 30th season is a masterstroke of strategy. It honors the history that defines this generation, providing a clean, intentional narrative hook. It clears the disappointments of the previous season and sets a high bar of expectation that these elite athletes are more than capable of carrying. It uses the league's most potent asset to ensure the world is watching.
And to summarize my perspective, while the matchup is undeniably exciting, the weight of expectation placed upon it is fraught with risk. By framing the season opener around a collegiate rivalry, we risk overshadowing the complex, professional reality of the teams, specifically the dynamic of 4 number 1 picks sharing the floor. True appreciation of the WNBA requires looking past the poster rivalry to see the team systems and organic developments that define a championship season, rather than relying on a prepackaged statement that focuses on the past.
Regardless of how we frame it, there is one thing we can agree on. Gainbridge Fieldhouse will be the center of the basketball world on May 9th.
Absolutely. Whether you're there for the narrative or the nuance, it is going to be a fascinating 40 minutes of basketball.
And that's what we're all here for. Join us next time on The Debate.